What's up, gangsters? How about 10 minutes of random? Okay, so here we go. All of my work since my last 10 minutes of random has been on my Stompy Robot vignette, and I've made lots of progress. I think in the last one I mentioned that I was going to be going off into the wild painting yonder of trying this Japanese hand-painted lacquer technique. And I did, and this is where it's at. You can see that I've got this kind of crazy looking camouflage scheme. It's one of those things where I kind of started out going in a certain direction, and it just evolved. And this is the way it turned out. I just kind of went with it, and I kind of dig it because even though it's pretty weird looking, that's really what I wanted. I wanted something that was non-standard, something that kind of got out of that, type of camouflage pattern that we're all used to seeing. I wanted to kind of do this three-color thing. I was watching one of Lincoln Wright's videos where he talked about outlining, and so I did that, and so there you have it. And this was a lot of work. I spent pretty much an entire weekend doing the hand painting on this, and you can kind of see what happens. With these lacquers, you are activating whatever's underneath, and you don't want to blow all the way through that, but you do want to use that to get your tonal variety, and you can kind of see where that's happening. One thing that I did that did not work out so well was I thought that using the Stynylrez, acrylic, polyurethane, whatever it is, I thought that would be enough of an inert barrier coat that it wouldn't activate it, but this MRP was going on so heavily that it was instantly crazing in some places. And I didn't mind a little bit of that. Maybe that's what happens when your energy weapon, hits you or something. I don't know, but I didn't want that everywhere. So, but that's okay, because as I kept adding layers, and this took probably 4 or 5 layers in most places to get the kind of coverage that I wanted, I managed to paint over most of that, so not a big deal. Then I came back and did some oil work to kind of lighten up some of the paint on top, give it a little bit of a faded look. Added a couple of decals on the shoulder patches. Of course, those are directly on top of GX113, so you can't get a really much less glossy surface for applying decals than that. And then I did a little bit of my usual sanding the decals to get them to look a little bit scraped up. Then my first exercise with my new Silhouette Portrait 2 cutting machine. Finally broke down and bought one of those things. Got it on Amazon. It was only $135. So, I finally had to do it. I don't really have a place to put it, but yeah, whatever. I needed one, so I got it. And this was my first go-around with it. Just used a simple font in the Studio or Portrait Studio editor. Created the call letters or whatever you want to call those, and then made this kind of sort of barcode looking thing. There's also one on top of the big Stompy Robot, so I kind of thought that would lend a little bit of commonality there. So, and came back, did a little bit of my creating some chalk marks with the white pencil, kind of give it a little more character. But so far it's been pretty smooth. The painting was a lot of work. One thing with the camouflage scheme is that you can kind of only visualize these in 2D. Yeah, but when you start painting it in 3D, you have to start wrapping it around the thing, and that's when sometimes it doesn't always work the way that you thought it was going to. It sort of turns into a little bit of a puzzle, but at any rate, got it done. I'm pretty stoked with it. And he is now at the same place that the big Stompy Robot is at, where it's, ready for that last bit of weathering. Now, you can also see that I have been working back here on making some sand dunes or drift sand. because that's the idea, that this freeway section has got sand blown over it. And so, how did I do this? This was a bit of an adventure because I've never made a sand dune before. Now, my AK diorama FAQ book said to use this DAS clay. So I bought some. It worked okay. Not sure I'd ever use it again. I mean, of course, after the fact, I asked some of the SMCG guys about it, and a lot of them were like, "Yeah, it's great." Some of them were like, "No, don't use that stuff." It turns out that it's honestly, I think it's not really clay. I think it's basically paper mache pulp that's formed into a brick, because it's real fibrous and it kind of smells like wet newspaper. So at any rate, it wasn't super easy to work with, and it didn't really leave a great texture. You can kind of see right here what I'm talking about. See how rough this is right here? So that's what I ended up with. And I had expected that I would need to do some refining, like for the edges there. And so that's where I got into my epoxy clay, which is fantastic stuff. I've used it a lot before. Well, actually, I've used epoxy sculpt a lot before. And they both work the same, where you can work on them with water. But I think that the difference between epoxy clay and epoxy sculpt is that epoxy clay doesn't have the metallic, which I think are aluminum particles, that epoxy sculpt does. So a little bit easier to sand and work with, but the stuff is stiff. It's nice once you get your finger wet and you need to start like working it and smoothing it, but still hard to work and did not get me exactly where I needed to be. I feel like these sand dunes need to be pretty smooth, to kind of indicate that they're wind blown. So what I did, hardware store, and got a tub of standard spackling compound, which is really easy to smooth with a wet finger, and then sands really easy. So yeah, yesterday I was chuckling at the fact that I am using a sanding stick to sand a sand dune. Yeah, I guess, I'm the only one who thought that was amusing, but nonetheless, that's what was happening. And so you can kind of see the differences. This is the texture just from the DAS. These darker patches are where I've got, you can see the epoxy clay, and then this lighter white stuff where it's nice and smooth. There's a lot of overspray on there from when I sprayed the sides, but that's where the spackling compound came in. Now, you can see the reason why this is still incomplete looking here is because the next thing that's going to happen, the sand dunes so far is all sealed in with Future right now, and what's going to happen next is I'm going to prime it with some sand-colored Stynylrez, and then put some dull coat on it so that it's ready for some pigment. But before I start putting the pigment down, I have to do the last step here. So see, because the Mini Cooper is supposed to be buried in the drift sand, I can only do a certain amount of shaping without the car in there, because on the windward side it needs to all be piled up against it. And so what I'm going to do next then is glue the car in there, and then use some epoxy clay and some Elmer's glue to create sand that's drifted up against it. But so far, I'm pretty stoked with the way that this part has come out. I feel like I've, got the car fitted into the dune in a pretty natural way. And once I pile some sand up around that windward side of it, I think it's going to work pretty good. I'm going to come back and use some Elmer's glue to create a little bit of a drift in front of the tire here, because obviously where I just chopped the bottom of the tire off doesn't look natural. These tires, they're the standard soft vinyl, and there just wasn't much I could do with them. I mean, I would have had to cast some out of resin to really get what I wanted. but there just wasn't any option to shape them as if they had collapsed or wear them, and the truth is, when a car sits out in the sun for 50 years or 100 years or whatever, the tires get baked into this hard, shiny, really black substance. And I really did not see how I was going to get there. So I punted and just used some oils to kind of give them that gray look, and a little bit of dry brushing to call out the lettering and so forth. So, I think they look fine, but they're not exactly what I wanted. But again, I just don't know how I would get there. So, at any rate, that's 10 minutes. So it's time for me to shut my mouth. But there you go. Stompy Robot Vignette Progress.